The Ford Escort is a small family car which was manufactured by Ford Europe from 1968 to 2004. The Ford Escort name was also applied to several different small cars produced in North America by Ford between 1981 and 2003. The Mark I Ford Escort was introduced in the UK at the end of 1967, making its show debut at Brussels Motor Show in January 1968. It replaced the successful, long-running Ford Anglia. The car was presented in continental Europe as a product of Ford's European operation. Escort production commenced at the Halewood plant in England during the closing months of 1967, and for left-hand drive markets during September 1968 at the Ford plant in Genk. Initially, the Continental Escorts differed slightly from the UK-built ones under the skin. The front suspension and steering gear were differently configured and the brakes were fitted with dual circuits. Also, the wheels fitted on the Genk-built Escorts had wider rims. At the beginning of 1970, continental European production transferred to a new plant on the edge of Saarlouis, West Germany. The Escort was a commercial success in several parts of Western Europe, but nowhere more than in the UK, while the national bestseller of the 1960s, BMC's Austin 1100, was beginning to show its age. It also competed with the Vauxhall Viva, and from early 1970 the Hillman Avenger. In June 1974, 6 years into the car's UK introduction, Ford announced the completion of the 2 millionth Ford Escort, a milestone unmatched by any Ford model outside the US. It was also stated that 60% of the 2 million Escorts had been built in the UK. The Escort had conventional rear-wheel drive and a 4-speed manual or 3-speed automatic gearbox. The suspension consisted of McPherson strut front suspension and a simple axle mounted on leaf springs. The Escort was the first small Ford to use rack and pinion steering. The Mark I featured contemporary styling cues in tune with its time, a subtle Detroit-inspired Coke bottle waistline and the dog-bone-shaped front grille, arguably the car's main stylistic feature. Initially, the Escort was sold as a two-door saloon, with circular front headlights and rubber flooring on the deluxe model. The supermodel featured rectangular headlights, carpets, cigar lighter and a water temperature. A two-door estate was introduced at the end of March 1968 which, with the back seat folded down, provided a 40% increase in maximum load space over the old Anglia estate, according to the manufacturer. The estate featured the same engine options as the saloon, but it also included a larger clutch, stiffer rear springs, and in most configurations slightly larger brake drums, or brake discs. A panel van appeared in April 1968 and the four-door saloon. Underneath the bonnet was the Kent Crossflow engine, also used in the smallest capacity North American Ford Pinto. Diesel engines on small family cars were uncommon, and the Escort was no exception, initially featuring only petrol engines, in 1.1 liters, and 1.3 liters versions. A 940cc engine was also available in some export markets such as Italy and France. This tiny engine remained popular in Italy, where it was carried over for the Escort Mark II, but in France it was discontinued during 1972. There was a 1300 GT performance version, with a tuned 1.3 liters crossflow, OHV, engine with a Weber carburetor and uprated suspension. This version featured additional instrumentation with a tachometer, battery charge indicator. The same tuned 1.3 liters engine was also used in a variation sold as the Escort Sport. The Sport had flared front wings, but featured trim from the more basic models. Later, an executive version of the Escort was produced known as the 1300E. This featured the same 13 inches road wheels and flared wings of the Sport, but was trimmed more upmarket for that time. A higher performance version for rallies and racing was available, the Escort Twin Cam, built for Group 2 international rallying. It had an engine with a Lotus-made 8-valve twin-camshaft head fitted to the 1.5 block, which had a bigger bore than usual to give a capacity of 1,557 cc. This engine had originally been developed for the Lotus Elan. Production of the twin-cam, which was originally produced at Halewood, was phased out as the RS 1600 production began. The most famous edition of the twin-cam was raced on behalf of Ford by Alan Mann Racing in the British Saloon Car Championship in 1968 and 1969, sporting a full Formula 2 Ford FVC 16-valve engine producing over 200 horsepower. The Escort, driven by Australian driver Frank Gardner, went on to comfortably win the 1968 championship. The Mark I Escorts became successful as a rally car, and they eventually went on to become one of the most successful rally cars of all time. The Ford Works team was practically unbeatable in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and arguably the Escort's greatest victory was in the 1970 London to Mexico World Cup Rally, driven by Finnish legend Hannu Mikkola and Swedish co-driver Gunnar Palm. This gave rise to the Escort Mexico 1598 cc Special Edition road versions. Introduced in November 1970, 10,352 Mexico Mark Is were built. In addition to the Mexico, the RS 1600 was developed with 1601, which used a cross-flow block with a 16-valve cylinder head. Both the Mexico and RS 1600 were built at Ford's Advanced Vehicle Operations facility located at the Everley plant in South Essex. As well as higher performance engine and sports suspension, these models featured body shells using additional strengthening panels in high-stress areas, making them more suitable for competition. After updating the factory team cars with a larger 1701cc engine in 1972 and then with fuel-injected BDC, Ford also produced an RS 2000 model as an alternative to the somewhat temperamental RS 1600, featuring a 2.0 liters Pinto OHC engine. This also clocked up some rally and racing victories. Like the Mexico and RS 1600, this car was produced at the Everley plant. The Escort was built in Germany and Britain, as well as in Australia and New Zealand.